all right, now I call to order the February 22nd, 2022 meeting of the Narberth Infrastructure Committee. Everybody is present. Is there anybody on Zoom at this time?
Yeah, I'm actually admitting right now Carol Marie Scanlon.
All right. I will again attempt to take notes that I'll turn into minutes. As long as that keeps working for everyone else, I'll keep trying to do it. We'll see how it goes. Okay. Is Jeff going to be, Director of Public Works, going to be attending? Because there's a lot in our packet that.
Yeah, so our Public Works Manager, I will actually text him. I know that he just had a newborn, but I do believe he...
You're kidding! That's exciting!
Last Thursday night.
Oh, I didn't know that.
The night of last Thursday. Yeah.
That's amazing.
You can zoom in and bring the kid.
I didn't know that. That's really exciting. Well, I don't really...
Yeah, I'll check and see.
No, I don't really want him to be here. I want him to be with his baby.
Yeah.
Well, if like a question comes up that we need to ask him and I'm not comfortable, that me or Eric
Sure.
aren't comfortable
Okay.
answering all
No
of the
problem.
texts.
No problem. Well, anyway, Mazel, that's fantastic. I didn't know they were expecting. Okay. All right, well, let's get started. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at the minutes from January and comments, thoughts? Ira, thank you for getting back to me.
Yeah,
Okay.
it looks fine.
Motion to approve? Anybody?
Motion to approve.
Second, everybody approves? Yeah, all right, approve the minutes. Excellent. All right, we have one information item for discussion about outdoor dining decorative barricades. I am guilty of not getting the information to you as early as I hoped, in part because I think where we left it was public health and safety was going to define the minimum safe barrier.
Right.
We were going to define some standards and sort of guidelines for what people could do beyond that. And I was just going to find some examples that we could discuss. And as I sort of looked and looked, I found the examples I thought it would be not a fruitful discussion to sort of go directly from the examples because they're apples to oranges and many of them are most of them seem to be incorporating the kinds of regulations that we put into our sidewalk ordinance that we've already advertised. And if we're talking about design guidelines, I thought it might make more sense to just, what I decided to do was just sort of try to identify what seemed to me like the central issues and sort of try to put together something that hopefully would be a start, a draft of what we probably would want to approve. And then we could just sort of go through them and see where it takes us. And one of the things that sort of as I was looking at this, I kept thinking it'd be helpful maybe to work more closely together because it might make sense to actually integrate the minimum safe barrier into this. I mean, or is that really what we're assuming? So where have you gone, first of all, as a committee? Since you're here?
We are going to, I think we're going to ask our borough engineer.
Okay.
You know, and for a recommendation, it doesn't have to be today, but
Okay.
you know. But,
Yeah, I also, I don't think I had a chance to bring Eric up to speed on that, but I did pose that question to Chief Gallagher and our Public Works Manager, Jeff Belden, and I'm awaiting some feedback from them as well as what they would be looking for in a minimum safe barrier.
Okay. So I would think we would have that by our March meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is coming up soon.
So I guess if we could maybe we could talk about the general issues that I put in the memo to sort of see where everybody's, just get a feel for where what people think about it. And I also think a lot of this, the more I thought about it after I'd sort of sent the draft out, I mean, most of this is really going to be, the rubber will hit the road at the point where Kevin reviews an application for a permit. And so, you know, I get into a lot of specifics, but none of which I think would be on the permit application, but there are sort of flags for how Kevin might approach this, how we might approach this as a borough, so we can both ensure that if we permit structures similar to like the one that's in front of the Greeks, that they're both safe and secure, but also meet the portability requirements that are in the ordinance that we're, you know, have moved on to advertise. And I guess the more I thought about it, the more I wasn't sure that anything actually can be both immediately removable in case of an emergency as we require, and also necessarily have the structural stability to be something that we're willing to have as a permanent fixture. So I suppose it might depend on what we mean by immediately removable. If we're talking about, an afternoon, there are probably techniques that we can have Kevin make sure he reviews for to ensure that the structures are relatively easy to disassemble. I mean, if you use nails and nail all the boards in separately, it's going to be hard to take it apart. If you think modularly and screw it together, it will be a lot easier. Maybe we could have some general guidelines in that regard, but if we feel like that's acceptable from a high-level policy point of view, are we willing to say it's fine to have a structure there that might take 2 to 3 hours to remove? Is that immediate, a day, an hour? We haven't really specified that in the ordinance. So I wondered specifically what you think in terms of, how quickly we need to make sure these things can be removed.
Yeah, I mean, the good news about like a snowstorm is like we have a little bit of heads up when a snowstorm is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think it's something that, I'm just making up a number here, but I would say like something that could be disassembled and removed like with a 12-hour notice or something like that.
All right.
But, I mean, the question I had is, and again, I don't want to it's hard for me to think generally, so I'll just look at the one that's already there. Why is it so important to remove that one for a snowstorm, given that it has a roof?
Right.
And that the owners agreed to clear whatever snow gets,
Sorry, I wasn't referring specifically to that one, but just in general, in case someone
Right.
put something in and they weren't as cooperative as, as that property owner is.
Right, but the question is, could there be an exception for someone who has a roof? Because if the snow removal is the only reason, if there's another reason, then, it needs to be discussed. But if the snow removal is the only reason why you need it removed, then why do we require it?
Well, I mean, suppose you have an emergency sewer repair, a sewer backs up, right, or some other utility repair, and you need
Right.
everything out. Okay, well, right.
Yeah.
Immediately becomes a very hard standard to meet. But I mean, there's significant discretion in whether we would enforce that. But I mean,
Right, okay.
I guess what I'm saying is whatever standards whatever we permit, we need to make sure that it's something we're comfortable with, how elaborate it is and therefore how difficult or how time consuming it might be to remove it in the event of something like that. Can you think of other kinds of things that might require relatively quick removal?
I mean, just thinking about here, if we need it removed, I guess what's a reasonable amount of time for ask somebody to remove something? So, let's say you tell them today, it's got to be removed. I think if a property owner has to take it out, I think they need to be able to mobilize and get that out of there. That might take them, that might be a day to remove it. So, and if you're in an instance where something is happening quicker than that, like you have the sewers erupting in the street or something, that structure is going to be moved by whoever's, it will be moved
Yeah.
by whoever's responding to that scenario. So, I think realistically, if it's a planned event or something that you need to know ahead of time, I'm hard pressed to think less than 24 hours is reasonable.
All right. Okay. After we reach the point where we've sort of defined these guidelines, maybe we should think about whether the ordinance that we're about to pass will also need to be amended to provide for that, or if it can be something that just goes into the permit separately as a resolution.
Just so we're on the same page here, so the outdoor dining ordinance has already been approved by council.
Right.
The sidewalk ordinance would potentially have some impact on this, depending on what sort of stuff we're talking about having people do, because we don't want to block the sidewalk. So I will note that Kevin did already start to send notices out to restaurants who've done outdoor dining in the past to let them know that the ordinance, exists and is out there. So we have started that conversation a little bit. We haven't gotten any applications in yet for review, but just so everyone kind of knows where that process is at.
I was having some technical problems, I missed that, but that's okay. Okay. I'm not sure. We're gonna take that. Okay,
And there was one other issue that you brought up, and, well, two other issues. One of them was, in your study of other municipalities, some people like limit or ban propane. I don't know that we're looking to do that. I mean, I would defer to the,
Yeah, I think I'd probably want to talk to, defer to either Kevin or the fire department, but I would say whatever, you know, I think there's already language in there about, in the existing ordinance about your ability to provide heaters and that sort of thing. So I would just kind of say whatever.
so it doesn't particularly call out propane as being banned in the other ordinance.
no, I think that the outdoor dining ordinance just includes heaters and fans in the definition of enhancement. I don't believe it has any additional regulations with respect to what that means with like an open fire pit. So again, I know we've already passed that ordinance, so I think the sidewalks ordinance sort of actually incorporates.
It does, it almost like reincorporates that ordinance.
Because it made
yeah.
some changes to it.
Yeah.
At this point, we've set it for advertisement, I don't want to pull it back. I guess my thinking is, do we have the capacity through regulation to further define it? I think there's some broad authority, and there might be able to use a resolution or something in our permitting process.
Yeah, and I would think the international fire code would give the borough, I mean, that's what we're using to implement the commercial fire inspection program. I would think it very likely that would give us some leeway in terms of what's going on there.
All right, that's fine. So go ahead.
And the final point of discussion in the memo, where we weren't necessarily on the same page, was the use of Jersey barriers. And so,
Yeah, well, I think that it makes the most sense to see what is the minimum barrier that we're going to require. What I seem to see coming up in other jurisdictions, guidelines for these things, I've called them streeteries, kind of just call them streeteries.
I like that name.
I mean, lots of folks call them streeteries. Some make a cute pun by misspelling street, so it's eat, like street, E-A-T. I'm not going that far, that's, but that they don't actually require barriers on the street side, on the side that is perpendicular to the curb, but they seem to require more protection on the sides, like where cars are parallel parking. I guess, that's, I think that what we should probably do is find out what the minimum barrier is that we're in, and see if we could just sort of then require minimum barriers to be placed probably on all three sides, and then whatever structures we approve, either integrated with them or contained within those barriers.
yeah, that's great. I was just summarizing what I read.
Yeah, so I think that makes sense. Jersey barriers don't offend me as much if they're not on the street side, but I think we've decided to not use them, so that's fine.
Okay.
So, I think that, can we just run through these real quick? I want to try to make this quick. So, talking about the definition of streeteries, basically, I saw there seem to be two kinds. There are the kinds that have a platform that keeps it level with the curb. Some places, but you also might see them, I think, like in front of, the Greeks where they have, I think, or in front of Red Market Pub, I think they have the Jersey barriers, but they don't have a platform. So they said, they have the barriers. They've set up an area within them, but it's at street level, so you have to step down. I think they're both fine. Unless the committee feels like, if we're going to allow these, they should have platforms, because they're, semi-permanent anyway, that's more easy to access, it's safer. I just want to know whether anybody has an opinion about that.
Platforms are much less readily removed quickly,
They are, yeah.
if that's an important factor that you're considering.
They're
Yeah,
they're also nicer. They keep the dining area above the street water, and they allow drainage
Oh,
underneath.
and from that, my personal experience with them actually is with what they had in Swarthmore, where the restaurant had it. They built a deck where you went straight out. It was quite nice. Sitting on there, you felt like you just walked straight onto it.
Yeah.
And immediately next door was a pizza place. It just had picnic tables like on the ground.
Yeah,
And that felt much less permanent, much less purposely constructed.
Right, I mean, I would have no problem allowing both. I mean, I think our committee's job is to sort of set the basic parameters so that we have some kind of standardization, so that we are going to allow these as semi-permanent structures, that they function well, and that they kind of look nice, right? Like we have, maybe they don't have to be identical, but there's a set of guidelines. You can make it out of these materials like this, but you can't like do that. So what do you think about, I mean, I think that the levels, what I call the level streetery that you just walk onto is nice, but the main thing would be to ensure that the platform and the floor were constructed modularly so they could be easily removed. I mean, you could even require those adjustable deck things, whatever you call them, those deck supports instead of a wood frame. Those are much easier to remove, right? What are they called? I put them in here. You know, I can't think of the name now. They're just pedestal deck supports, you know? They're just like,
yes.
They're like, you know, so like you'd have those rather than pallets. I mean, they're easy to remove. Again, these are just sort of things that at some point somebody's going to make just some decisions about how prescriptive we want to be about these structures if we're going to allow them. And then those that may not currently be constructed that way, are we going to require them to be rebuilt?
Yeah, it's just, while you're brought up stormwater, I'm just looking at, you had, some of these have been constructed on the street this past year or so. Was there any observed like negative impacts, stormwater related, or?
I have no idea.
I didn't hear anybody, that's why I was just thinking about that. You're talking about water flowing through, we're putting an obstruction in the road, which theoretically could have an impact on stormwater, but nothing came back to me as there having been an issue.
I don't know what their platform's like underneath.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd want to put a platform so you didn't have, you know, wood on the, you know, perpendicular to the sidewalk, and you backed it up from the curb and you allowed water to flow under it.
I'd be interested in Eric's on this. I mean, this is a PHS conversation, but maybe like the minimum safe barricade like has some sort of, goes all the way down to street level so that water would flow around it instead of through it.
I mean, to a certain degree, whatever we're putting up against the curb is going to have water passing underneath it. I wouldn't put a solid obstruction out. You're going to let, even if water like hits the front of the barrier, kind of impounds a little bit, it's going to need a place to seep out and keep flowing underneath.
Well, yeah, otherwise, I think like we said, I think that's the discretion then of a business, whether they want to do the platform design or whether they want to be on the ground level with the caveat that water is going to flow through there sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, the barricades, obviously, I assume that whatever minimum safe barricade we describe, it's going to have to allow, it's not going to be pressed right up next to the curb. It's going to be backed off from the curb to allow an appropriate distance to allow water to continue to move.
Right.
Yeah, okay. So if we allow both types, that's fine. I think for the actual standards of what needs to be constructed, I mean, I think that what we need to sort of do is decide who is going to specify that. Is that Kevin? Is it Eric? Is it both of them together? I mean, somebody needs to say, these are things that it's okay to build it up, like your floor out of, right? As opposed to, or do we want to just say, hey, it's your insurance policy, it's your problem, build your floor however you want. If it's slippery and people fall, it's not on us. I mean, I guess my question is, how prescriptive do we want to be? Like, I got fairly prescriptive here because that's the way I am. With the thought that we can always cross things out and say, this is too much detail. We don't really want to be responsible for micromanaging the structures.
I think unless Eric feels strongly on this, I think that just in the same way that Kevin reviews any other zoning permit, I mean, I think we're kind of treating these outdoor dining things as basically zoning permits.
Right.
And so since Kevin's already reviewing them in that regard, and Kevin does know the building code and knows what things you need to worry about with that, I would trust Kevin to make those judgments.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I would be deferring building construction to him, so.
Okay. So the permit will that's fine. We'll just leave discretion that it has to be constructed to meet his interpretation of the building codes.
Exactly.
That's great. I like that. With the caveat that it also needs to sort of provide for water management in a way that's unique to the fact that it's positioned in the street.
Right.
Protection in a way that's unique to the fact that it's located in the street. And I mean, there are definitely some facets of it that are different from like building a house, clearly.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, certainly, Kevin has to deal with, sheds and decks and all sorts of, signs and, yeah, so I agree with that. There's different things you have to think about with it.
Yeah, so I'm just going to march through it and then we can just sort of talk about this. So we talked a little bit about platform and floor construction, I think are things we can clearly leave to Kevin, right? Those are buildings and things. Now we're talking about wall design. If you look at what's been put up in the last 2 years during the pandemic, I mean, it runs the gamut from truly attractive little permanent structures to people just sort of threw everything they could think of out there, including old refrigerators to block up the space. I think that the idea here was that we were supposed to sit down and think about what kinds of structures we find aesthetically within the range of aesthetically acceptable, what they would be made of. How tall can they be? How tall can the barrier walls be? What kind of opacity do you need? What kind of roofs are acceptable? What kind of materials are acceptable? These are things that I think, we already have one structure downtown that has not provoked any, negative responses. In fact, people, when surveyed about keeping downtown dining, and I think that structure was already up and nobody, that I'm aware of, the survey didn't provoke a response where people said, no, that's horrible. So I think that gives us a sense of what would work. And it's a pretty common kind of way to construct these. So, 36 to 42 inches in height is pretty much across the board what everybody sets for the barrier walls, right? You want visibility above that. I think it's, fine to allow, they can integrate planters and greenery. The greenery can go higher than that. You can put some kind of polycarbonate or plastic vinyl, material above that to shelter your guests, but as long as you can still see through it. I feel like the grease is already doing that. That's probably acceptable. I thought wood boards and slats, pallets in good condition, plywood panels that have been painted or covered in some way, or some kind of other sturdy panel material for the walls are all fine, but I didn't think necessarily metal fencing sections, vinyl fencing sections, ropes, chains, other things that I've seen walls constructed out of. I think we want some uniformity. We want to probably put some standards in place. All right.
I guess I just need some clarification. I thought we were mostly focusing on the perimeter walls, the barricades, and not so much the construction inside.
These are the perimeter walls. What do you mean?
What were you talking about? The roof? You were talking. I think, unless I'm misunderstanding, I think this goes a little bit beyond the perimeter walls.
If we're assuming that the perimeter walls are in all cases going to be made of the minimum safe barrier,
Right.
That's right. But it has never been clear to me, which is one reason why I never really got much headway in this, because I kept thinking, well, is that what we're saying? That the only thing people are allowed to use is the minimum safe barrier walls? In which case, why are we talking about this?
No, I think that my thought on this was to talk about what is basically what we've been discussing. That has been my vision on what to talk about.
Okay.
But if the committee feels differently,
I just was clarifying.
Yeah.
I'm fine either way. I just wanted to
So would
understand.
we permit a structure like the Greeks, for example, that did not have, in addition, the minimum barrier walls around it? Yes or no? Would it be okay to put that on the street without whatever yet undefined minimum barrier walls there are? Is it, as a standalone structure, sufficiently safe to be on the street?
That's how it is in the city, right? I mean, most cities,
Yes.
they're very ugly
Yes.
without any Jersey barriers.
Yeah, but do we need another barrier in place of the Jersey barrier to make it safer? That's the question.
Well, right, so then we'll have an answer soon.
Okay.
On that.
If the answer is yes, there's still a further question whether or not, somebody wants to only use that, or whether they say, okay, great. I'm gonna put these barriers where they're required to be, but I want to build my own structure inside of it. It's just still visible, right? Because the barriers are probably not gonna be continuous. I mean, we still need to say, okay, that's fine, but the wall that you construct within this safety perimeter can only be 36 to 40 inches high, and it can't be, you know. And then we have to sort of decide how prescriptive we want to be with standards to create sort of a uniform look. But we're going to say, I don't care. As long as you've got safe barriers, you know what, your interior wall can be made of chains or, you know, chain link fence. Do what you want. I think we want to probably impose some degree of aesthetic, you know, like standards on it.
Yeah.
I know this won't satisfy the answer, but my goal is like that it be safe and not ugly. I realize that's not something you can write in an
We're trying to
ordinance.
operationalize that right here.
I know. I just want to be clear on that.
Yeah,
I agree.
You summed it up, yes.
Yes, I guess the way I would look at this is PHS is taking on the responsibility of making it safe, and we've taken, this committee's taken on the responsibility of making it not ugly.
All right. So this was my first job, was to set forth in E4 acceptable materials, unacceptable materials, and a few standards for sort of like, you know, if your materials are kind of really irregular and you know, sort of shoddy looking, you need to do something about them on the surface so they look reasonably nice, like paint them or sand them or stain them. And you can't put commercial signage on the outside of the logos, you know, facing the street side, right? Those are the things that I thought of that could be, you know, sort of hopefully addressed and not ugly. Well, you know, there's never any guarantees.
Okay, it's in that bias.
But at least to say you can't use a chain link fence, you know, that's not, you know, it's gonna, you know. So we should have a height limit. Most jurisdictions do. A lot of them say 10 feet. That seems a little high, but at the highest point. What say you, committee?
Okay, we're on this whole, like I could speak to point 7, the commercial signage, or are we just talking about height?
Oh, yeah, speak to
Okay,
7, of course.
because, you know, I mean, you know, these, this is one photo, you've seen all these downtown.
Yes, it's in the packet.
And they have beautiful,
But I didn't print it out.
they have beautiful painted signs.
Yeah.
So they could have a painted sign, right, but not like
They're
a,
like logos, painted signs. I don't know what's on the backside. That's La Casita. That's
Yeah.
theirs, right? I know, it's very pretty.
yeah, something like that. I mean, but when you have 7, commercial signage is prohibited.
Okay,
Like you next to have some signage.
okay.
I mean, you know, not like a neon flashing sign.
Okay.
I mean, like it would still, I guess we'd have to write, so like it would still have to comply with all of our
Right.
sign regulations
Yep.
otherwise.
Well, we have plenty of sign regulations in the zoning code, so we can just reference the zoning code. I suppose. That's fine with me, you know. I think one thing we didn't want to see was sort of one of,
Right,
you know, like glaring logos on the outside.
right.
It seems like, just looking at these pictures, what everybody has, which I'm sure we would allow, would be the, what do they call them, the easels or what are those things called?
Sandwich board signs.
Sandwich board signs.
Right.
They have to be picked up at the end of the day, yeah.
Right, and that's already permitted in the outdoor dining regulations and the sidewalks, it's part of sidewalks. Okay, so we definitely allow that. I mean, I'm fine with allowing some logos on the exterior side of the streetery, if everybody's comfortable with that.
Mhm.
And we can just reference the zoning code, so it's not a neon sign, that's fine. I guess the zoning code doesn't really specifically address.
Zoning code
Structures
would
like that.
address size and location and number of signs permitted on a property.
Yeah,
So if you have some, I don't know specifically your zoning code regarding to signage, but it's going to regulate the let's say a storefront is allowed to have one sign of X size.
Right.
If you already have that in the building, you're then going to have a potential zoning conflict if you go to put another sign on front of the property, unless you're explicitly allowing them. I just want to make sure it's not going to get hung up when
Yeah, I
Kevin's
know.
looking for it at a zoning application.
I mean, in my mind, it's just more straightforward to just say, you can paint it with all kinds of pretty stuff, but just don't put commercial signage.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Only just because then it does get a little bit more complicated. I mean, it's true, if we reference the zoning code, it's not really apt. I mean, that goes on and on, the signage, but it also depends on like, but you know, there's just a lot of things they don't apply, like box signs and illuminated box, I mean, things that are not, I'm not sure which regulations in the zoning code would even really be relevant here. And like you pointed out, it could cause a conflict because you have a lot on sign.
If you have a conflict, it goes with the zoning code.
Yeah.
Unless explicitly stated otherwise.
Okay, that's fine. I just,
What do you think? Ira, you want them to not be ugly?
Yeah.
Can we have commercial signs, zones, logos and, you know, and not be ugly, or? I'm
I would try to avoid like advertising, you know, that kind of like stuff. But I mean, that's probably already not allowed, right?
it's not clear, we don't really have rules for these, you know, street structures.
No, I meant like on the building. Could they put like an could they put like they go to a billboard or something up there? Or not really, an artistic building?
On the building, a billboard?
I
I don't know what you mean.
I would say probably not, without knowing our sign ordinance. And I think that, I think that's really the question here with the street rate is, what if any level of, like, are we willing to say that like a business could put like a small like thing on it just so people know, hey, like this is our business, but I don't know, I guess it just depends maybe on how much you think the street area is going to otherwise block the view of the existing signage a business has. And I think it would be minimal, probably just kind of knowing how to have.
I mean, I would just say something that's consistent with their existing signage.
Okay, all right, you know, this is something that we just need to look and just sort of let's just craft some standard that keeps businesses' ability to sort of identify itself on the street area within reasonable boundaries. Maybe we should just craft something instead of trying to use the zoning code because it might create problems, okay?
okay.
All right, so we'll look at that, but we don't, I mean, unless somebody wants to make a suggestion today, it's something we could, I think we're going to need to take this up next month after we have more information on barriers, so we'll bracket that for now. But I would love to get through as much of this as possible. Support posts, you know, there are things here that sort of talk about structure that we can take out, and we'll just pump those to Kevin. But then there's also sort of the use of what you can put if you're going to have support posts that go above the barricade and support a roof, or just go up but don't support a roof, right? You could have seen them with, they'll just make posts that are like 8 feet tall or 10 feet tall, and then they have like a barrier around the 3 sides, and then on those posts they hang string lights and decorations and stuff like that. I think that's fine. I don't have any problem with that as long as it's safe, right? So, and then we already have a street area that has a cover, right, a roof. It doesn't seem to be creating any problems. I think it's reasonable that that it's pitched so it doesn't shed water on the sidewalk. That it is pitched and that it sheds water on the street. That if snow accumulates on it, we require the owner to remove that snow so it doesn't just, you know, a big sheet of ice doesn't fall and somebody is walking by it. And those seem like reasonable regulations. Anything else with respect to those roofs that?
Well, did Kevin, you said he met with all the business owners, or did he get any pushback, or did they haven't had a chance to push back?
I don't think they've had a chance to push back it, because right now, the way the ordinance is written, it basically just like whatever everybody was already doing, you know, with one sort of exception in terms of it reduced the number of parking spots McShay's has, was pretty much, you know, so there wasn't really much for business owners to really argue against. And I think it sounds like the way we're designing this, it wouldn't create any handicap for the, you know, for the one existing structure we have. But if anyone else then wanted to do one, you know, these are going to be, you know, the regulations.
I mean, it is another way to think about this, that like what we're going through right now is to give them permits for 6 months. Because that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe this, what we're doing today would kick in after their current permits. Does that make sense? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, you're allowing them to do it now, right? So
Right.
is it okay to change them? How do you change them? I know you can always.
Yeah, and I'm not, just with just how things have played out before, I'm not super concerned at the moment yet
Right.
about it. And it could be something where we also let people know that if they do turn in an application that has a structure in it, we could let them know like, hey, this is good for now, but just so you know,
It's
council is
common,
not
that way they don't spend money.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, exactly.
I'm down good with it. I just don't wanna,
Exactly.
you know, like, have someone go get the permit, like, do this whole
Yeah.
thing, and then all of a sudden, you know.
Agreed, that's really the thought I had.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking in terms of how we phase this in. That's
Okay, great.
what- And it also applies to sort of filling this gap between, Kevin is going to do ultimately a review that's going to incorporate his knowledge of building codes, and also is going to have sort of an eye to making sure that these can be removed within, I think, a 24-hour period reasonably. I think that it would be helpful in the permit for this if we found a way to articulate to folks before they take the trouble to draw this out, do a permit. We're going to be looking for this with an eye to how removability. Here are some suggestions for what you should specify to make sure that, to increase your chances for approval, without a lot of iteration. And so maybe Kevin could help us point to both parts of the building code that they should look at, standards for water management that they should look at, and some suggestions for how to create a more portable structure that they can look at. I think it would be helpful to give that to potential applicants up front to save them time.
I think I would want to talk to Kevin about that.
Yes.
Just because because we don't do that for other sorts of permits. I do think that people should know kind of what we're going to be looking for,
Yes.
absolutely. Because we don't want people, maybe we don't want people to put the time into something that's just going to get denied. That's a waste of their time and the borough's
Right.
time and all that. Yeah. So they can figure something out for that, yeah.
Yeah, at least some general standards. If they know we're going to be reviewing this, expecting that you're going to be designing a structure that can be disassembled and removed within 24 hours. So think about that. Think about, panelizing, think about modularizing, think about the weight of materials, right?
True, and I mean, it's pretty regular with other permits, it's partly why we kind of have that fee now. If people spend more than 30 minutes with Kevin.
Right.
It's pretty common for people to call Kevin and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing X, Y, and Z, what do I need to be aware of? And I absolutely think we could, do the same thing with this.
Okay. I mean, I'm comfortable with that. I just wanted to make sure that people didn't come forward with these designs and then or either build them and then realize after the fact, like, this thing is too hard to take apart, or wind up saying, well, why can't I do this? Yeah, so I want to make sure they had notice of that. Okay, so the things on traffic delineators are really, it's section H, traffic safety controls, because a lot of, obviously, municipalities have all kinds of standards, and they often require traffic delineators in addition to sort of barriers, like those posts that you put at the corners of the street that have reflective material on them.
Oh,
So that was put in there because I think that that's something that public health and safety could take up in discussion of barriers, whether there's some integrating some kind of reflective feature into that. That seems like it would belong in that category within the aesthetic. So I pass that on to you for whatever the committee wants to do with it. Those are sort of standards that are taken from other municipalities.
Maybe Samantha, could we ask you to share this piece with the chief and, the safety?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, just, so that we could discuss it in our public safety meeting. That's, H.
So then section I, we already talked a lot about that, and that would be, these are the things that Kevin's going to sort of work on, the appropriate level of definition to put into a permit, so that we can give people some general standards. And then J, lighting. I assume that we're fine with lights being added to street use, lighting. Do we want folks to specify the kind of light, the location of light in their permits, so that we know that it's not going to be blinding to traffic, that it's going to be located a safe distance above the sidewalks, that they've thought about how they're going to feed power to it in a safe manner.
Yeah, I would say that. Well, I would say one exception to that might be in the same way that we have the buffer for streeteries that are adjacent to a residential property.
Mhm.
We might want to have like two different kind of sets of things in regards to lighting. I don't know what the answer to that is yet. I'd have to think on that, but that's just my initial gut reaction to it.
I think your existing code has standards for commercial properties lighting up against residential. So I would say they have to comply with that same lighting requirement.
Okay,
And as far as the power, logistically, they're going to have to demonstrate how I think you've already alluded to it, providing power from their structure to the eatery.
yeah, I think that should be part of the process, like part of the
Yeah.
permit, show us how the power's getting there, make sure that it's done safely, like the grids.
And presumably, like an overhead line,
Yeah.
at 12 feet in the air isn't a problem.
Correct, and that's the idea. It's going to have to be high enough over the sidewalk. Yeah,
I mean, they can't steal it off the power pole.
they cannot.
No, because we have
No,
the
they
balance.
cannot.
No,
Well, it's very clear publicly, given everything with Rico and the borough last year, no, they
There's no history.
there was no availability of an outlet along the
Right.
street.
Yeah, okay. So with respect to the lighting requirements, again, that's something that we'll just make sure that in the permit, we tell applicants that they need to show us how they're bringing lighting, and it needs to be, somebody said 12 feet above? I mean, I don't think there's a building code standard for how to bring an
Right.
extension cord from your storefront to a streetery. It's something that we need to say, how high is acceptable. So what is it? I put
I like-
7
I like
feet, that's not
12.
high enough. You said 12?
12 is a
I
reasonable.
like 12, yeah, it's a really tall
It's going to
person.
put you over over the first story of the building.
So again, what I will try to do from this discussion, by the way, is I'll try to take all the things that we talked about, going into the permit for Kevin, and sort of just put a little bullet point list, if that's okay.
That'd be, yeah,
And
thank you,
then we
yeah.
can take it over from there, right? These are things we've identified as being issues that would be helpful to address in the permit process,
Yeah.
as to your discretion.
And by the way, thank you for doing this.
Oh, yeah, no
Yeah.
problem. I just didn't know how we were going to do this without, there were so many different standards and ideas. Anyway, so trees, I noticed a lot of jurisdictions have regulations about how these structures can relate to street trees. And I don't know how we feel about including standards like that, because it's not in our sidewalk dining or outdoor dining, sidewalk or outdoor dining ordinance. Whether they can shade or come in contact with or be placed within 1 foot of the trunk or branches of a borough tree.
You mean the structure or the propane?
The structure. Yeah. There are some municipalities that specify they can't be placed within or over borough tree beds. I don't think that our standards would allow that anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. You can't prune a tree to get it out of the way of your structure, for example. I think that those are standards that probably make sense. And I assume those standards would, again, they would be something that would be passed by resolution and included in the permit, or how would that?
So I would say that our
come
shade tree ordinance actually covers a good chunk of that already. Like my understanding, it's been a couple months that I've read our shade tree ordinance, but I'm pretty sure it says that people can't prune trees within our right of way without permission from the shade tree commission.
Okay, so then it makes sense to just reference the shade tree ordinance on the permit or something. So
Absolutely, yeah.
So they have to comply with that, they can look and make sure they know what to do. Perfect. Thank you, it's a great. Okay, so umbrellas and tents.
Oh, well, what about the lights?
Sorry.
That
Oh, yeah.
That would be okay with me, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it's fine. I mean, I did notice a couple of the sets of guidelines that I looked at specifically said you can't put lights on, city-owned trees. We already have a lot of that.
Do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm fine with it.
Just allow it.
I'm fine with that. Okay, I don't think it's a problem. I'm not sure why cities say that. I doubt they actually enforce it, to be honest with you. But, okay, final item, umbrellas and tents, which are a little different from permanent roofs. And I don't think we have necessarily standards for what kind of umbrellas you can use or how they need to be secured or weighted if they're part of a streetery. Presumably they can't be left out overnight. No.
There is a risk with umbrellas that aren't proper that they like take off. and
Yes.
Hit somebody, so
There
there is a
is.
safety issue there.
Yeah.
There is. So I suppose if somebody wants to use big umbrellas as part of their street area rather than a roof, it should be something that they indicate on their permit and that they let us know how they're securing them so that Kevin can review them. It's just, so I think it should be.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely agree with that.
I mean, even tents had that, I mean, most people have fixed it by now, but like, in the heart of the pandemic, some of the tents were taken off.
Oh, wow.
Not ours,
Sure.
but I know ones that I've seen, but the version 2 was a lot more secure,
Right. I would suggest tents only be allowed in
the parking lot.
parking areas, privately owned parking
Yeah.
areas and not anywhere else. That was what I put here.
Yeah, I know, but when that thing takes off and you're underneath it, it's
Yeah, no,
scary.
it's not good. I kind of feel like we've pretty much got through this. So we'll wait to see what public health and safety. I will maybe do another version of this based with our comments that simplifies things and pulls out all the things that are going to Kevin, pulls out, all the stuff that we've done a lot of simplifying. This is going to be like one quarter the length, and that's really what I wanted to do. Thank you very much.
And I'll share section 4 with the chief and Jeff before the next PHS meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So just taking notes is not necessarily such a great thing. All right, unless anybody else has anything else that they wanted to comment on with this, I will move on to the next agenda item. Everybody good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next, and it is in our packet because it was timely provided to us. Request from the Cooperative Gardens of Margaret to for use of space. This is just sort of their official request. I mean, I don't, basically, Fred suggested that they come through committee take a look at it, make a recommendation at the workshop, have council approve it.
Are there any concerns?
I have, has the office heard any concerns? or
It's
had-
literally the same thing they're already doing, right?
It certainly is.
Yeah, I haven't heard any
Go for
concerns or issues. And as, just as a courtesy, I shared, I explicitly shared it with the chair of Parks and Rec as well. So I don't see any issue with it.
Good.
All right, thank you for doing that. So I think if everybody's comfortable with it, we'll just at the next meeting ask council to approve that. Okay? We'll put it in the packet and make sure nobody has any concerns with it. So next up, our Public Works Manager has a request for seasonal closure of park bathrooms, but it is not in the packet, so I'm not sure.
Sure.
if you are willing.
I'll give a little background, but I'm probably going to request that we table it, because I do think this is something Parks and Rec should probably discuss before it comes to us.
Okay.
And also B, because our Public Works Manager isn't here.
Okay.
But basically, the understanding I have is over the past few months, we've had a number of vandalism incidents in the bathrooms. And the thought process by the Public Works Manager, who's also shared these incidents with our police department, is that because of the lack of use overall the bathrooms get in the wintertime, it's easier for people to do vandalism and graffiti because they're not going to get caught. And so his thought was that they generally just be locked up from like December through February. But again, I think that's something that I want Parks and Rec to talk a little about, and I'm sure you all would have questions that probably be best for Jeff to be able to answer as well.
Yeah. I
But
think-
is that after football season is over?
I think so.
I mean, like.
Yeah, no,
normal
I mean,
football.
that's exactly what I think Parks and Rec should probably talk about, because
Right,
the head of NAA is on our Parks and Rec
Okay,
board.
okay, well, then,
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, this is definitely a question for Parks and Rec to vet before we take it up. So I'm in favor of tabling that. Everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. Item CC, Borough Snow Plan. And there's a memo from Public Works Director Eldon in the packet. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, with the equipment we need?
Yes, that's Borough Snow Operations memo.
Yeah, I guess one of the main things I'll say is the biggest thing myself and our Public Works Manager want to do following that snowstorm we had about a month ago that caused some issues for the public, is we just want to make sure we're on the same page with what council and the public expects from us in terms of what our snow response should be. And so Jeff put together this information, our public works manager, put together this information for you all to know, just to know what, like, this is our general operating plan. And if there's anything different you all would like us to do, we're certainly open to it. And Jeff then had some suggestions on equipment investment the borough could make that would further improve our response. One of the challenges we ran into, and I want to be really respectful to folks in how I address this, is I'm very grateful for, like, apparently in the past the borough's made use of some of our fire volunteers to serve as part-time labor for helping with snow removal activity, notably shoveling sidewalks and all that. I think that despite bumping the pay on that up, we bumped it up from a few years ago, it was like $10 an hour, and then most recently, we got it approved to $20 an hour. There's just not a lot of availability from those part-time folks to be able to do that. And again, that's nothing against them. I'm very grateful for the work they do with the fire department. It's just when it comes to shoveling snow, they have other responsibilities that they're involved in and all that. So to make up for this, for the lack of manpower, that's why Jeff has proposed some of these equipment things, most notably the broom. And I will know one of the challenges Jeff and I ran into as well. And so he and I tried to find an electric model. And Public Works does have money in their budget this year. They're converting a lot of their equipment from gas powered to electric. But unfortunately, this was an item where we could not find an electric equivalent. Hence why the recommended one in the packet is a gas-powered piece of equipment. So I guess just the biggest things we want to find out from the committee is, like, what sort of level of snow removal do we want and expect, and what sort of investment and equipment are we comfortable making if we want to do anything beyond procedural or operational changes.
I don't know how to categorize level of snow, level of snow removal. I don't have a.
So that's what I would say is, like, do we expect the streets to be like, do we expect, like, the kind of saying in municipal government is, like, do we expect the streets to be, like, completely black after within so many hours of a snowfall, or is there an acceptable level of snow coverage we're willing to allow? Because emergency vehicles and even non-emergency vehicles, like, is our minimum standard just that it's drivable, or do we want a standard that, like, there's certain, say, like, we could just say, like, we just need emergency vehicles to be able to use it, we just need everybody to be able to use it, or we want it to be, completely clean and black. I guess they're kind of like the levels I'm thinking of.
I think probably the middle tier is.
Right, but and then what I would say is, because it's the same thing that Fred says about all these things, is what do our other neighboring boroughs do? So we know what what we compare to other people near us, and you probably know that or could find out.
Yeah, I'd have to ask around, because honestly, I think it's kind of a little all over the place depending on the municipality, which kind of those levels I would say they slot into.
Yeah.
And I think the big thing for me being new to this area, probably the biggest thing is our residents are going to see Lower Marion's roads most frequently, given how they encircle us. So I think probably a good place to go. And I know Jeff did have some conversation with the Public Works Director in Lower Marion, is maybe just modeling, our standards that's close to theirs as possible, potentially.
I mean, that makes sense to me. It's just, I would think the only thing that makes us a little bit different is that we have a lot of very narrow roads with cars, at least right now, parked on both sides. So, it does make it a little bit more challenging. I think Lower Marion in general is a little bit more, the roads are in general wider. I mean, the other thing, whenever you get a request like this for a lot of equipment, especially, I guess some of this is not budgeted in the current calendar either, right?
Correct.
Is, are there, like, what are the priorities? Like, if we could get the you know, is it more important to get the street, you know, the electric,
Yeah, I think probably of the requests Jeff has made, and again, I don't necessarily want to speak for Jeff, but my best understanding is probably that broom is the thing that's most important to Jeff. Again, just to make up for the fact that, you know, it takes a long time to shovel all the sidewalks if you only have like 1 or 2 people that can do it. I think the other thing that's probably going to be important to him, second most important, is being able to spread that calcium chloride. Part of the problem we had in that last storm was the temperature stayed consistently at or below 20. And below that, you know, salt really doesn't work as well. Plus with the calcium spreader, you use less salt when you do it that way. So there's an environmental and cost benefit to that. So I think I'd say probably the broom's most important.
Yeah.
The calcium spreader is second important, and then the various plow attachments are probably least important.
But maybe there's enough money to do some of the more important things now, and then make some of the others part of a budget, so that way you can trade them off against other expenses.
True. Yeah, so I mean, I would say that Jeff and I could certainly come back with a proposal of how we would, you know, be comfortable adjusting the public works budget to maybe accommodate, you know, a higher priority item, and could come back, you know, next month with that, and we could talk more with Laura Marion.
Are these items that we're planning to take out what's currently budgeted, or budget for now, and then maybe also when we're doing our budget for next year, budget for the items is that what we're talking about now? We're talking about taking out of the budget now that exists for this year.
If Jeff thinks that we need, my thought would be to talk to Jeff, and if it's something that he doesn't think can wait until the 2023 budget,
Okay.
would be to come to you and be like, hey, we're gonna not do this year in exchange for buying this.
Here's the only thing that I would add to ask, because I think this is great and it's really helpful to have this level of detail. I think that if it's reasonable, I'd like to ask, and I've already run this by Jesse. I'd like to ask if we can have a consultation between our public works manager and the EAC on these topics of snow removal and environmental impact of different equipment, different products and such forth.
Yeah.
And just sort of have some reporting on that. But we have them there and they're really knowledgeable. It won't hurt, it can only help us. And so then, you know.
I mean,
Good idea.
I agree.
the
Yeah.
reality is we're not buying it for this winter, we're buying it for next winter.
Right.
This winter's, you know.
Hopefully.
Well, by the time you would get it, it's over.
Yeah.
Snow's coming.
I know, but you know.
Hopefully I have an inch. So Jesse said that they'd be open to that. I said, I asked him personally, would this be appropriate and would you be willing to make the time for it if our public works director also thinks it'd be appropriate? And he said they would. And the thing to do would just be to sort of contact him and get it on the agenda and they can have it.
Yeah, I'll connect it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
that's
connect
good.
Jeff and Jesse. I like that.
I mean, the other thing is, if we do have to get this broom, you know, and there's no green alternative, we can use our internal carbon
Oh, that's right.
shadow
Yeah.
pricing scheme, you know, and then we can, you know, kind of charge ourselves internally for the carbon
Thank
and
you for
move that
reminding me of
into
that.
our green fund, you know, as we've talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that, yeah, I like that.
Okay. All right, anything else on that for now? We don't need to do anything on that, we're just gonna,
No, I'm gonna talk to Jeff, connect him with the chair of our EAC, and we'll go from there.
okay,
Cool.
thank you. All right, so the TCDI grant opportunity. Samantha, you would like to give us a little brief on that.
I talk a lot, I'll let our borough engineer handle that one.
All right, Eric.
All right, so I have not been too directly involved in it, but connection between me and Mike Schneider. I guess there's one of the items in the borough's comprehensive plan is kind of a reevaluating and assessment of the transportation and circulation, traffic, bikes, pedestrians moving around the borough. You know, I think there's we all know there's these traffic issues. We want to improve pedestrians, we want to improve bikes, but there's no real, we want to get like those 10 ideas kind of together. So the grant program that's available now, it's the Transportation and Community Development Initiative, which is run out of DVRPC, is funds that could be used to help create these plans and advance officially it's to advance the Connected 2050 Plan of Greater Philadelphia, which integrates all of these types of improvements. And this funding can be used for planning, for like a comprehensive planning. So to undertake that kind of study and planning to improve circulation around the borough. So the grant is open now. I think it's due at the end of April, I believe.
Yeah.
So I think it's just kind of bringing it up now. So the next step would be if the borough wanted to pursue this funding, that now's the time to start the process of that.
So can you give an example of like one or two examples of the kind of things it would fund?
So it's been, you
Give a personal example if you want.
That was, I think, Mike. So my colleague, Mike Schneider, is actually he works with us, but he's the borough traffic engineer. They actually did, I think he was out in Chatsford. They did recently, I think it was Chatsford, they recently did a comprehensive study. That's a different animal out there. It's much more rural. But they used the study to help guide their development as it's going through. With they're more in this phase of like building out road infrastructure.
But this is to pay for the study.
This is the study that would
That's all
help
I was
guide.
asking.
And what so this would be a study. It's your comprehensive, as you progress is always based on what you've previously done. So to this point, you guys have done a comprehensive plan that said, we identified circulation as an issue that we'd like to tackle.
Yes.
Okay, so now this is the opportunity for funding to say, okay, we want to advance that, we want to come up with a plan of what is good. The benefit of having that plan is then, you then have the basis to see other funding and other initiatives in the future.
So study before plan, right? So this is to fund study.
This would be the study
And
that
then you base the
develops
plan on it.
that develops what you can do,
Because
yes.
when we were talking about some things on Windsor Avenue, I remember that the traffic engineering firm that we had brought in, the first step they recommended was a study.
Mhm.
And it was like, to study 3 intersections, it was like $40,000 or something like that, I can't remember.
Well,
So
and that's
it was
the
a
thing.
very, we said, we don't really have that budgeted right now. So this is a very expensive part of doing traffic planning, right? Is to
Correct,
actually
and
get
that's-
accurate study
When you start
information.
looking, right, so it's studying or coming up with a plan of how to change traffic and bikes and pedestrians is a kind of an intensive process. And this is funding to help offset that.
So pardon my ignorance, I'm just gonna throw out like a buzzword, but I wanna hear how the two relate. Is this
Okay.
related to smart streets? Or is that a different thing?
Smart streets.
Or complete streets.
So complete streets is where you're going. So it's, yeah, so I know it's Vision Zero complete streets is what the full buzz term you're thinking of. And
Yeah.
that is yes, it's kind of in line with that. And the city of Philadelphia has actually gone pretty far into it recently, where they're envisioning it's using a street trying to get away from that path we've had where a street is for cars. And that's just what it is.
Right.
Trying to reintegrate and reassess
So
that.
they're consistent with.
Correct, yes.
And you could even like say, in this planning, we're gonna look at how we could implement complete streets in Arbor or something.
Right, so so you guys have streets you have to maintain, have circulation around the borough. You have vested interest people have in improving bikes in the borough. We always want to improve pedestrians, so this is kind of that. Start looping that together.
You started at least the process of an active transportation plan, right? In New Britain, which is sort of, it seems like the same, like a different name for the same kind of idea, multimodal.
Yeah,
Streets,
the only,
active transportation, I don't know.
yeah, I did complete myself and Kent, who you all have had a chance to see before, did do an active transportation plan for the Borough of New Britain, and it's completed and all that. And yeah, basically what it is it talked about, like, these are where bike routes should be and how they should work, and here's how pedestrian infrastructure should be improved, and these are like the various like walking loops or walking kind of routes, you know, people generally are going to take. And so what Eric is proposing would be that plus the vehicular component of the traffic circulation audit. So this is basically from our comp plan, traffic circulation audit plus complete streets.
Okay.
And it's a state grant.
It's regional, so it's the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
Is there,
what do you need from us, I guess?
yeah, is there a match, and do we know what the amount?
So
maximum
there's
grant
not a required match, but I think the borough, to be more competitive, should put in some nominal amount of match. So I didn't apply for it, but right when I started in New Britain, they were awarded a TCDI grant, and it was something like where the borough paid $10,000, the grant paid $90,000, and it was a $100,000 grant total. So I have asked Eric and Mike to have a proposal ready for the PHS meeting that would have some sort of kind of estimate cost on this and what sort of match we're thinking about. The borough budget does have some planning money available that could serve as the matching funds, but I think we'll have a much better defined proposal for the March PHS meeting.
Don't forget my, now that we have like NIDA back together.
There you go.
Sure.
Right.
If, yeah, you know, if it's not easily available elsewhere.
Yeah, good point, Ira. Thank you.
Do we want to let
What?
public comment?
We will, we're not there yet. Yeah, no, I think that's great. Yes, exactly, back to, what, do you need anything from us? Do you need anything from council at this time? What?
Not yet, just your general kind of, you know, make sure you're generally comfortable with the idea of moving forward with it, and then otherwise we'll present it to PHS, and then it'll come up to council.
Okay, who would do this work? Is this one professional provider to do the planning and to the studying and the planning? Is it multiple? Do we have to put this out for competitive bid? Like, what are the grant requirements? Do we have to have identified?
No, we could just have,
How does this work?
yeah, as long as Eric's comfortable with it, we could just have Panoni do it.
I mean, we have between me and Mike Schneider being our traffic engineer, he's had some experience with these. Well, I should say, he has experience with these, he has been doing. He actually had this grant before. And this all ties into, it's all traffic related.
Okay, anything else on that for now? All right, item D are borough projects. The manager Ryan has provided a memo. I don't know if anybody on the committee has any questions or if you have any further detail. My only questions pertain to the bridge. Anybody else have anything? I just wanted to know if there will be a sort of further detailed briefing. I think we talked about it in March, that Panoni might do that on the status of all the
That's
various
right, yeah.
engineering
So I did
projects.
talk with Jennifer Regal, our engineer from Panoni, working on the bridge project. About the last time I spoke with her, she seemed pretty confident that a more comprehensive update would be available to council by the March work session.
Okay, that's still on track, probably?
Yeah, I'll know for sure. Next Tuesday, but also it's going to be
Okay.
on the work session agenda.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we advertise it like widely if possible, like once we find out. I mean, maybe you can put a notice on the
Yeah, I'll follow
information board,
with,
just because folks will be very, very interested.
Yeah.
Whatever emphasis you could put on her.
Yeah, I mean, I just know that it's,
Like deliver on that date.
Yeah, I'll definitely.
with the
I'll remind
decades that
her,
this has been discussed, people will be very, very eager
It's just
for more information.
The time has come for an update.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
with the bridge design that we saw those proposals from Ventura Scalfront, we're putting out, the offices and put out some form of survey to the community, correct?
We're going to on Friday, yeah.
On Friday,
Because we needed
great.
them to give us the like revised font on the one design.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll see what comes back. That's exciting. And what is the decision date? Or,
It'd be the March council business meeting.
okay. Excellent. All right. Any other details on anything else that you want to talk about on these projects?
No.
Yeah, so then, okay, great. then in that case, I would like to move on to public comment unless anybody has any other additions, anything else? Okay,
All right, so we do have
Public
one
comment?
member of the public on Zoom. Adam, Mr. Adam, I apologize to pronounce your last name wrong. Gazon.
oh, Adam Kazin.
Yeah, I don't know if you have any public comment you'd like to make today.
That's a no, I think.
No?
All right.
Okay.
All right, sounds good. Thanks. Thanks for joining us today, Adam.
Anybody
He's
else?
good. No, there's no one else.
No,
on Zoom.
Cameron wasn't here, okay. All right, then there is no public comment, and I think that I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Did you see everyone?
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.